In the years before the Great War, there were three large corporations that controlled nearly every mine in Appalachia: Garrahan Mining Company, Hornwright Industrial, and Atomic Mining Services. Each of these three had their own means and methods that uniquely affected the environment and local economy in their own way. I'm the iCartographer, and this is the story of the mining magnates of Appalachia. A quick note before we get started. While I will try to provide the most accurate account of events in this video, there are some areas where I will have to make some educated guesses. Specifically, there are no established dates for some events, so I have to place them in proximity to known ones. There are also given dates that contradict events established elsewhere in the material. I will flag these instances in the notes. With that said, let's get started. Since the 19th century, Appalachia has been a prime area for mining operations. Thanks to its wealth of natural resources and close proximity to population centers on the eastern seaboard, the region has been heavily exploited for centuries. Over time, however, as labor costs rose and ore quality declined, many mines became unprofitable and closed, devastating those communities that relied upon them for income. Although technological advancements reduced the number of miners needed, so long as the mines operated, the communities survived. Eventually, the remaining profitable mines were consolidated by larger corporations. By the mid-21st century, nearly all were in the hands of just two giants: Garrahan Mining Company and Hornwright Industrial. These two rivals were similar in operation for most of their history. Both relied upon skilled human labor to perform standard shaft mining across Appalachia. The first real shift in the industry came in the 2060s with the arrival of a newcomer: Atomic Mining Services. AMS introduced a radical new method to the process: nuclear mining. With the profitable mines already taken, AMS bought up and reopened the unprofitable ones. Their strategy was simple yet terrifying: use atomic charges to shatter the rock, then send miners in to collect the debris. While this approach was, on the surface, horrifying, the impoverished communities of Appalachia were so desperate for work that AMS was welcomed with open arms. The strategy proved highly profitable, and soon AMS had enough funding for a major project: Watoga. Fully automated, Watoga was intended to be the city of the future, a place where robots performed all the labor. Though funded by AMS, the city was primarily built by Robco. Located in a remote corner of Appalachia, it was a strange sight: a cluster of skyscrapers surrounded by cranberry bogs. Meanwhile, the original mining corporations began their own moves towards modernization when Hornwright Industrial passed to the next generation. When Daniel Hornwright took power at Hornwright Industrial, he brought a radically different philosophy on labor. While his father had claimed, "Your products are only as good as the people who build them," Daniel viewed the human element as a weakness. To him, human labor was an imperfection to be replaced by circuitry and steel. To that end, he initiated a cooperative research project with Robco. The product of this union, combining Robco's robotics expertise and Hornwright's drilling prowess, was the Autominer. This specialized protectron unit was capable of digging more efficiently than human miners. It also didn't get sick, didn't need maternity leave, and didn't suffer from family emergencies. Rolling off the assembly lines in the early 2070s, these robots immediately began replacing human workers in Hornwright mines. Soon, practically the only human workers Hornwright needed in its mining operations were repair technicians for the autominers. In Watoga, AMS was deeply frustrated by Hornwright's breakthrough. They had conducted their own research collaboration with Robco, but it hadn't yielded anything as effective as the autominer. Worse still, rumors circulated in the company that the machine might have been built using stolen ideas. In 2069, Penelope Hornwright, Daniel's daughter, had completed a summer internship with AMS as part of her college program. By the time she joined Hornwright Industrial as an engineer and senior executive, some on the AMS board had grown suspicious of the autominer's provenance, wondering if Penelope had leaked proprietary data. However, the CEO of AMS made sure the board knew there was no evidence to support these claims. Though Hornwright was taking the lion's share of the autominers produced for their own operations, AMS began to replace some of their own workers with Hornwright's machines. With so many miners out of work, anti-automation protests began across Appalachia. Former workers from Hornwright and AMS began to peacefully protest their former employers. However, labor relations were not the only controversy these corporations were stirring up. The environment was suffering a heavy toll from their reckless actions. Though AMS didn't perform atomic mining beneath the crown jewel of their growing empire, Watoga, the surrounding cranberry bog was beginning to show the after effects. Subterranean detonations rendered the surface increasingly unstable. An entire town northeast of Watoga was declared unsafe for occupation, its buildings condemned. While the wealthy of the area retreated to their new utopian paradise, the local working class were losing everything. Across the mountains to the west, Hornwright was inflicting its own environmental devastation. Prior to the introduction of the autominer, by 2070 at the latest, Hornwright had installed a massive bucket wheel excavator atop Mount Blair and begun excavation. Known as the Rockhound, this nuclear-powered cyclopean beast of industry tore the mountain down level by level. The enormous machine, a proprietary piece of technology, was fraught with technical issues from rapidly draining power cores to faulty seals that allowed 6,000 gallons of hydraulic fluid to pour out onto the mountain. The company's primary concerns as this leak unfolded? Lost productivity. The team that failed to correct the problem had the downtime losses deducted from their paycheck. With the ongoing war with China, the federal government had grown lax in enforcing labor and environmental regulations. The public was less forgiving. As the mining companies faced mounting opposition, Hallucigen Inc., a Boston-based manufacturer of crowd control technology, began shipping free samples to the corporations. When Vivian Garrahan, CEO of Garrahan Mining, received a sample of hallucinogen gas, she planned to send it back with a message of where to put it. Unlike her counterparts at Hornwright and AMS, Vivian was working on the means to keep human miners on the job. In the spring of 2075, Vivian Garrahan began a new project in Garrahan's research and development department, the EX-17 excavator. Power armor had recently made its debut on the battlefields of the Alaskan front of the Sino-American War. While the military use of the suits was obvious, the powered frame that made carrying heavy plates of bulletproof armor possible could also potentially serve civilian purposes as well. To that end, Vivian Garrahan hired power armor engineer Harold Frost, fresh from the U.S. Army's Research Corps. Her goal was to join the physical might of the power armor chassis with the intelligence of a human miner, a combination she was sure would defeat Hornwright's autominers. By September, it had become clear that though a standard power armor chassis was combat ready, it could not withstand the demands imposed by mining. The vibrations from drilling through rock were tearing the machines apart. Bryce Garrahan, one of Vivian's sons, suggested the use of black titanium as the primary material for the excavator. Though expensive, it had the tensile strength Harold needed for the suit. Black titanium, native to Appalachia, had already been sourced by Hornwright to serve as the cutting teeth for the Rockhound on Mount Blair. While Harold worked on creating a path forward in human-guided mining, Daniel Hornwright was expanding his automated mining operations. In early April 2075, not long before Harold Frost began his work, Daniel Hornwright arrived in Monongah, West Virginia for a meeting arranged by the Township Council. He had a proposal for them. Let him take over the local coal mine and mine it for them. He would purchase the mining rights up front and then use his autominers to extract the coal. No one would ever have to risk their lives in the mine again, and the town would perpetually earn royalties for every ton of coal extracted. Monongah happily accepted this overtly generous offer. By April 18th, the autominers were on the job. Though it took some time to secure the mine for safe operations thanks to a devastating collapse in 1907, over the coming months, coal began to flow from the mine like water. The autominer was, by all appearances, a rousing success for Hornwright and a welcome addition to the community. Meanwhile, a discovery on the other side of the mountains was about to upend Atomic Mining Services' entire business model, Ultracite. When AMS initially discovered the strange green crystals in their mines, they had no idea what it was, nor its source, but a few things quickly became clear. First, their atomic mining was somehow responsible. Second, it was a source of immense power. If they could solve the problem of not knowing how it was made in the first place, the opportunity posed would be incredible. They would be the sole supplier of an energy-dense material in a world starved of energy. That said, Ultracite did also put a bit of a damper on their automation efforts. Unfortunately for AMS, autominers didn't appear to be capable of moving Ultracite after it was harvested. Thus, they were forced to augment their automated workforce with humans who could collect the crystals. With this adjustment came an interesting phenomenon where the autominers appeared to be breaking down far more quickly than usual. Seemingly, the human miners may have been taking revenge for their former colleagues. Regardless, AMS stepped up their nuke drops in an attempt to create more Ultracite, while testing the recovered material at their headquarters in Watoga. There, their labs were filled with different animals that AMS exposed to Ultracite's radiation. While we don't know everything they learned there, we do know they were highly unsuccessful in their efforts to discover how to improve Ultracite yields. At a drop site outside Welch, West Virginia, the company dropped several charges and detected no Ultracite beneath them. Incidentally, it turns out they were simply terrible at detecting Ultracite, but we'll come back to that story later. In the meantime, the Ultracite they did have was beginning to find a diverse customer base. Along with strong interest from the government, Poseidon Energy refitted the old coal power plant WV-06 to an Ultracite power plant. Meanwhile, in Charleston, Daniel Hornwright was working on a new project that might well put his own autominers out of work, the Motherlode. Not long after Hornwright brought the autominers to market, a friend of Daniel Hornwright's, an employee of the Department of Defense, told him of a new aircraft. Though still a prototype, this vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, known as a vertibird, was showing promise as a long-range transport, air-to-ground attack craft, and reconnaissance vehicle. Daniel's engineers had another idea for it. Take the mineral detection capacity of an auto miner, strap it to this vertibird, and mineral surveying would be a cinch. This specific version of the idea never appears to have come to fruition, but the idea of providing mineral detection to a larger chassis found life in the Motherlode project. Instead of a flying vehicle capable of detecting minerals to later be harvested by auto miners, the Motherlode rolled both functions into one. It was designed to be a digger, capable of detecting minerals, digging its way to them, and then harvesting them for delivery to the surface. This project was both a massive technical undertaking, to which Hornwright dedicated an entire R&D team, and top secret. Though Daniel's daughter Penelope had joined the company as a senior executive and engineer in May of 2073, she was not privy to the project's objectives nor its activities. Instead, Daniel tasked his daughter with other engineering projects and day-to-day tasks. One such day-to-day task involved removing protesters from mine sites where they were slowing work. Noting that Penelope didn't have his killer instinct, he sought a way to automate this job his daughter found unpalatable. Working with Robco once more, Hornwright developed strikebreaker robots. Daniel was now in a position to remove anti-robot protesters from his company's property using anti-protester robots. This was apt, as in early 2076, Daniel earned some more hatred from the public. When the auto miners began to tear into the coal seams under Monongah in the summer of 2075, Deke Sykes, the overseer, believed the coal would flow for years. By Christmas Eve, however, it was clear that there were only weeks left. On January 7, 2076, the auto miners were packed up again, and support equipment was already shipped back to the depot. Realizing that Daniel's promise of perpetual royalties for every ton of coal extracted had been a pipe dream, locals arrived on the perimeter of the property to watch the evacuation. As night fell, a crowd of drunken townspeople stormed into the mine, intent on seizing anything they could carry, anything they could sell to pay the bills. While deep in the mine, an explosion sounded at the entrance. Those who had ventured within were buried alive. Maggie Williams, whose father Earl was trapped inside, tried to get Hornwright to reopen the mine and free her father. The company claimed that her father was simply missing as he had left town. Others in Monongah refused to raise the issue, likely, in Maggie's mind, as they had been paid for their silence. While the town died without the previously slow but steady income from the mine, many began to leave. Within the mine, those who had been buried were still alive, or at least most were. When the collapse had come, one of the townspeople had been killed. When those who had survived considered their options, some decided they would eat the remains of the dead man rather than starve. As the horrors surrounding the actions of Hornwright unfolded in the darkness beneath Monongah, Garrahan continued his progress with the excavator. By May 2076, Harold Frost had finished rebuilding the excavator with black titanium. He found that, thanks to this new material, the suit was capable of withstanding the wear and tear of mining operations. Unfortunately, a new problem had arisen. Black titanium was heavier than conventional materials, and as such, the excavator was too heavy for the standard power armor reactor. He believed he had a potential solution, but it required going outside Garrahan. Thus, with Vivian's reluctant blessing, Garrahan Mining signed a 10-year supply contract with AMS for Ultracite. On Christmas Eve 2076, Harold Frost had finally produced a miniaturized Ultracite reactor that would be capable of powering the excavator. Over the next 6 weeks, he got it mounted in the chassis, and by February, the excavator was functional. It was by no means a polished product, but functional nonetheless. It wasn't long after this that Vivian Garrahan dramatically raised the stakes. With her competition for the auto miners finally taking shape, she issued a challenge to Hornwright Industrial. Garrahan's excavator suited human miners against Hornwright's robotic auto miners. The challenge was a controversial one around the company and the Garrahan household. Though Vivian and her son Bryce were sure this was an excellent idea, most of the rest of the family was less enthused. Vivian's eldest son Bill didn't tell her to her face, but he thought the challenge was crazy. Her husband Brighton wasn't also fully on board, though he didn't tell her so as to not sap her confidence. He wanted her to give the suits time to take root. This man vs. machine event, slated for April 7th, 2077 in Lewisburg, was bound to be a pivotal event no matter the outcome. As the event neared, everything was looking up for Garrahan. They had 3 suits running without a single serious breakdown or maintenance issue. The miners were all clamoring to get their hands on one, with Bryce Garrahan using his to set the company record for ore extracted in one day. With everything on the line, the auto miners and excavators arrived in Lewisburg for the showdown. The battle was epic and well matched, with both teams giving it their all for 12 straight hours. In the end, Hornwright carried the day, winning by a mere 1.85 tons. The outcome was devastating to Vivian Garrahan. She had thrown everything into the excavator and come up short. She'd made the challenge, and despite admirable efforts from her workers, they had been beaten. In a post-match phone call, Daniel Hornwright offered her the option to lease some auto miners for her mines. She went home and didn't leave for over a week. When she finally returned to work, she had to face a reckoning. Garrahan's stock was in freefall. She shut down the excavator program. As she saw it, though she'd wanted to do everything she could for the workers of Garrahan, she also had to consider the financial obligations of the company. The only way forward was to accept Daniel's offer. Soon, there were auto miners arriving in Garrahan's mines. Had Vivian known that Hornwright had cheated in the Man vs. Machine challenge, she may have been less amenable to his offer. Regardless of this, the competition between Hornwright and Garrahan had effectively come to an end. Flushed with his victory, Daniel looked for new realms in which to expand his empire. The public was soon introduced to a ballot measure known as the Appalachian Prosperity Act. Also known as the APA, this measure intended to replace the human workers of the state government with machines and automated systems. Doing this would supposedly bring cost savings and improvements to efficiency. As one of the companies that was well poised to provide some of the machines and systems, Daniel was a strong backer of the project. To celebrate the news that the APA would be on the ballot that November, Daniel sent an email to the governor, inviting him and the First Lady to a dinner with himself and his wife. However, the APA was not without potential downside. Not only would the government employees lose their jobs, but the communities they supported with their income would suffer as well. Opposition to the APA began to form. For the time being, though, it was disorganized, and Daniel focused his efforts on the Motherlode project. Here, he hired a young woman he poached from AMS's Electronic Intelligence Division. Despite the fact that she did have a PhD, the other researchers dismissively referred to their new colleague as Ms. Jackson, and planned to relegate her to making coffee. Soon, she proved, however, that youth and less than outstanding credentials didn't mean she wasn't capable. After a mere 4 weeks, she had solved 3 of their top outstanding issues, and had even produced an in-field repair system for the machines. To cap it off, her coffee was sublime. As June arrived, Hornwright's spies broke into Garrahan. The agents made their way into the shuttered R&D department and recovered the plans for the excavator, obscuring their efforts by sabotaging generators and starting fires. While there was plenty of interesting, proprietary tech used on this project, Penelope was generally unimpressed with the excavator, calling it a black titanium coffin. In July, Penelope was called to the Rockhound to sort out an issue with the power cores that kept the massive digger working. With a rework to the rate at which power was drawn from these cores, she was able to raise their life expectancy from 3 minutes to an hour, and the great digger kept chugging along. Early August brought with it an interesting act of cooperation. Hornwright Industrial simply could not keep up with demand for autominers. Thus, they struck a licensing deal with Atomic Mining Services, and soon autominers were rolling off their production lines as well. When she'd finished inking this deal, Penelope returned to her office to find her father had received schematics from the Clear Skies Alliance. This environmental group had designed an industrial air purifier intended to restore breathable air quality in southern West Virginia. Her father hadn't been terribly interested in it, as the initiative wouldn't generate profit, and the public goodwill it might engender wasn't worth the cost. However, Penelope saw that these purifiers wouldn't just clean carbon from the air, but also recover valuable heavy metals. When she brought this to her father's attention, he approved the plan, but he didn't care to maintain the partnership with the environmentalists. Instead, he renamed them ash forges, and there were soon 4 such locations underway across a region so ecologically ruined, it was colloquially dubbed the Ash Heap. It wasn't long after this that tragedy struck Hornwright Industrial. In late August 2077, Evelyn Hornwright, Daniel's wife and Penelope's mother, passed away after a long illness. Daniel and Penelope took this loss in their own ways. Penelope stayed at their Bramwell home for a few days, mourning the loss of her mother while cognizant of the fact that she had escaped a miserable life attached to machines. Daniel dove into his work head first. Though he sent flowers to the house and showed concerns for his daughter as she mourned, he appeared to have blocked out much of the rest of the world. He dedicated himself wholeheartedly to the Motherlode project. Penelope wasn't thrilled with this, as not only did she not know what the project entailed, the costs were rising, and she was growing frustrated with her father's secretive attitude. Emails she sent him on the matter went unreturned. Daniel appears to have been shaken out of his new obsession in early September by the news that Senator Sam Blackwell had come out against Daniel's beloved APA. Once a labor leader working with the miners, Sam Blackwell had been popular enough with the people of Appalachia to be elected a United States Senator by a wide margin. Though his reputation had recently been marred by an association with the anti-governmental survivalist group known as the Free States, his long-standing struggle for the people of Appalachia left him well-positioned to lead the resistance to automation. When interviewed by the Charleston Herald, Sam Blackwell called the APA a slow-moving disaster and asked, "What do the people of Appalachia get from ballot measure 6 other than pink slips and empty bellies?" Roused from his focus on the Motherlode, Daniel was swift to act against this enemy to his empire's growth. Publicly, he called out Senator Blackwell's association with the Free States as a sign that he didn't care for the people of Appalachia. Privately, he sicked his fixer Harper Rosiak on the senator. Whether threatening a U.S. senator was something he normally would have done, or if his black mood resulting from the death of his wife was a factor, we'll never know. But the fixer did his job well. Almost immediately, the senator abandoned his post, picked his daughter up from school, and vanished into the ether. Days later, the senator gave an interview from his secret bunker, calling out shadowy forces in the government that wanted to kill him and his family. Daniel was thrilled and thanked his fixer for doing such an outstanding job. Across Appalachia, it seemed everything was going well for Hornwright and AMS. Auto miners were simultaneously cutting labor costs while increasing efficiency. Atomic mining was producing valuable ultracite. Come November, it appeared they were on track to win a ballot measure that would ensure their financial success outside the mining enterprise. Hornwright had even managed to monetize pollution. However, underneath all of this, a dangerous current of unrest was brewing. Since Garrahan had lost the man versus machine event and begun to lease auto miners, more and more miners were out of work. The anti-automation protests that had been underway for years worsened with each layoff. While the out-of-work miners started with simple, peaceful protests and picketing, Hornwright and AMS were making things worse through a showcase of their power. As frustration grew, the miners began to lob rotten vegetables at the limousines of executives. While Vivian Garrahan took this development in stride, Daniel Hornwright had the protesters that did the same to his daughter arrested for assault. Though miners had been standing on the borders of Hornwright and AMS properties and protesting for months, they soon found the owners using new tactics, such as moving the boundaries of their properties so that the authorities could come and arrest the protesters as trespassers. Once protected by Sam Blackwell's influence, when he abandoned public life, the miners found themselves without a patron. In the Cranberry Bog, the mayor of Watoga requested that the governor call out the National Guard to clear out squatters in the bog town. These squatters, being the lawful residents of the town until AMS had reduced their homes to condemned ruins through their atomic mining. All of these events were turning the working people of rural Appalachia into an angry mob without anything to lose. After taking abuse for years, all they needed was one more act of outright malice or even mere insensitivity to explode. As it so happened, that final insult came on October 2nd, 2077. Welch, West Virginia, home to miners for over a century, had been greatly impoverished by the collapse of the labor market. Despite this, a small population clung on and tried to live their lives in the quiet town. Late on the night of October the 1st, 2077, the peace was shattered, as was the ground underneath the town, when enormous crystals of ultracite suddenly burst forth from the earth. Homes were ruined as the massive, glowing green crystals tore the landscape apart. As the locals tried to get a handle on the situation, agents from Atomic Mining Services arrived to claim the ultracite as their property. AMS reasoned that the ultracite growth must have simply been a delayed response to their tests nearby months prior. When the AMS agents attempted to forcibly evict the Kaminsky family from their home so that they could harvest the ultracite, they found themselves surrounded by an angry mob. When agents ordered the townspeople to return home, a riot broke out. Within hours, this riot had gone region-wide. The state and local governments lost complete control over the situation. Minor groups that had organized for nothing more than acts of peaceful protest became a faction of armed militants taking on the mining companies. These miners, who had previously gone no further than throwing rotten vegetables or smashing the machines that had taken their jobs, lost their prior restraint. Soon, the Rockhound was inactive, seized by armed miners. This blow to Hornwright was matched by an attack on the property of AMS, more specifically the CEO of AMS. Using explosives, a group of miners attacked an unfinished mega mansion in Bramwell, bringing the structure toppling down. Penelope Hornwright acted fast, deploying what forces she could to secure various Hornwright sites across the ash heap, and using what influence she could to ensure that AMS got the blame for the unrest. For 9 days, the region was in complete chaos, with armed robots patrolling the streets being the only thing that kept the fighting from spreading to Charleston. When the National Guard did finally restore order, Penelope Hornwright visited the Rockhound and was grateful to discover that the miners had been unsuccessful in their attempts to bring the mighty machine low, thanks in no small part to its complexity. She quickly ordered its repair and for work to begin again, now with a third shift to replace the lost productivity. Her father, on the other hand, didn't care. Had it fallen, he would have been happy to write the whole thing off. Throughout the entire ordeal, Penelope had generally been unable to contact her father, thanks to an event that had preceded the riots by 2 days. On the morning of September 29, 2077, a reporter from the Charleston Herald arrived at Hornwright's headquarters. His name was Bill Breyer, and this was actually his second visit to the premises. On both occasions, he had asked about the same thing, the Motherlode project. On both occasions, Yvette, the receptionist, had told him she knew nothing of the project. Yvette reported this to Penelope, who told her she'd done the right thing, and to report it to Daniel directly. Daniel took this news poorly. He believed that one of his researchers must have leaked information from the top-secret project to the public. From that moment on, he entered the lab with his researchers and took direct oversight of the team. He was there on the early morning of the 1st of October when his head of PR informed him that Bill Breyer had attempted to infiltrate a Motherlode test site and been shot by security in the process. They claimed that he was holding his recorder like a gun. When the same head of PR told Daniel that he should make a public statement to set the record straight, Daniel fired him. He settled instead on lying to the public and ordered that the incident be referred to as an accident. The killing of Bill Breyer caused Daniel to come to two conclusions. First, that he needed more executives with his ruthless mindset. And second, that he needed to replace his security officers with robots, as surely those robots wouldn't have been so careless. In the end, the killing of Bill Breyer would come so close to other bigger stories that it would generally be lost in the mix. Over the course of October, as Daniel grew increasingly paranoid and protective, he fired the head of his research team while pushing Miss Jackson hard. As the Motherlode project was coming together, across the mountains, things for AMS were about to completely fall apart. October was a bad month for atomic mining services. Their attempted seizure of their property in Welch not only touched off the rioting in southern Appalachia, they also received the blame for said unrest from the government. They didn't get the Ultracite, they lost their men in the process, and they were on the hook for damages caused by the rioting. Ironically, the disaster wasn't actually AMS's fault, but their speedy attempt to greedily seize the properties with Ultracite under them made them the perfect scapegoat. I told the story of the true culprits of the events in Welch in my video covering the Gleaming Depths. Regardless, just days after the fighting finally died down in the ash heap, AMS committed an act of incredible destruction in the Cranberry Bog, setting off a chain of subterranean nuclear detonations in the local mine systems to speed up production. While one might assume this was done as a way to recoup the cost of their disastrous insensitivity in the ash heap, it had been planned since at least August before being delayed due to safety concerns. Whether this chain detonation was in any way related to the riots they spawned is unknown, but it indeed caused massive destruction. Kerwood Mine was a small AMS coal mine on the edge of the mountains run by Roy Kerwood, a fool who had gotten his job through family connections. The mine foreman had to lock the safe to keep Kerwood from literally just taking stacks of cash for his own uses. Regardless, when AMS set off the chain of detonations on the week of October 12, 2077, it caused a series of collapses in Kerwood Mine. This killed 17 men immediately and trapped 32 more behind walls of rock while water flooded into the mine through newly opened fissures. This disaster in the mines would, disturbingly, pale in comparison to the events of Friday, October 22, 2077. While AMS had done enormous damage to the land around Watoga, they'd managed to preserve their city of tomorrow. Unfortunately for them, one of the locals whom they'd ruined in the process was one of the most intelligent and effective programmers with Robco. Scott Turner, a citizen of the Bogtown, had tried to gain residence in Watoga for himself and his mother. Unfortunately for all involved, Watoga had turned him away. Though he undoubtedly made enough money to pay the costs, he wasn't their kind of person, and was prevented from gaining entry. It was at this point that Scott began to plan a rebellion against the snobs who ran the city of the future. After an attempt to distribute revolutionary rhetoric went down like a lead balloon, Scott decided to go a different way. Working long hours, he managed to create a patch for the robots performing all the labor within Watoga. This patch included a whitelist based on photographs for those who would be allowed to live within Watoga. The idea was that those not on the whitelist would be forcibly removed from Watoga. The whitelist would effectively be the new city elite, who would be the ones to decide who could come and go from Watoga. Scott added himself and a few others to the whitelist and set the patch for the next scheduled update. When the patch went through, Scott was at home, his trailer within a shed in their ruined Bogtown. When the news came in that the robots were murdering the people of Watoga, it was a sudden, violent reality check for Scott. He'd grown to loathe the elite of Watoga so much that he'd forgotten they were human beings too. The citizens were so dependent on these machines that they were everywhere and in every home. It was a massacre. Everyone from the top executives of AMS and the military leaders they were meeting with at the time, to the average citizen waiting for the bus, were killed the same. Hearing this and realizing what he had wrought, Scott collapsed, undergoing a health episode that rendered him immobile. In this state, he was incapable of rushing to his office to fix the issue. The military moved in and set up a cordon around the city as the surviving residents fled into the Cranberry Bog. The next morning, Saturday, October 23, 2077, the citizens and military occupying the marshes outside the hostile city watched bombs falling across the world around them. The war with China had turned nuclear. As the people of Watoga fled to the nearby abandoned Allegheny Asylum, those inside the city who hadn't escaped likely died over the coming days. Across the mountains to the west, the state government effectively collapsed in confusion. The governor was missing, leaving the Speaker of the House and the Majority Whip to fight for power. To the south in Bramwell, Penelope Hornwright received an automated email from her father telling her to create a special keycard and use the elevator to go to a hidden safe room. He'd planned to show it to her himself, but set up the failsafe in case he wasn't there at the time. The room was an interesting space, both set up as a lab for the Motherlode, but also as to serve as a shelter for his daughter, and her alone, as there was only one bed. Penelope, though, didn't intend to hang around, and she instead went next door to find the man she loved, Garrahan. The two of them had secretly been in love for years, and had even planned to marry before it all fell apart that day. Together, they fled the carnage of the bombs and made their way into the newly born wasteland. As for what happened to the rest of their families, it's hard to say. There are no records of Vivian Garrahan, her husband Brighton Gould, or their eldest son Bill Garrahan. All we know of Bill and Bryce's brother Isaac is that he was immensely fond of sloths, maintaining cages of them on the first level of their Bramwell mega mansion. His obsession is likely responsible for the proliferation of mega sloths that roam Appalachia over 25 years later. Daniel Hornwright was similarly not heard from either. Tanner Holbrook, the aforementioned Majority Whip, made an expedition to Bramwell shortly after the war and reported back that the mega mansions were empty. However, we do know something of those who worked for these corporations or were harmed by them. At Kerwood Mine, the end of the world wrecked any potential attempt to rescue those men that were trapped in the collapse. The only man left alive at the site was the foreman, Sam Bailey. As October rolled into November, Sam felt the chill of the coming nuclear winter outside and hunkered down to attempt to ride out the worst of it. The refugees from Watoga formed a community within Allegheny Asylum that, by March of the following year, was forced to evacuate due to attacks by raiders from the Bogtown. We don't ultimately know what happened to these people, other than that some were bound for Harper's Ferry, while others planned to make their way over the mountains to Monongah. Speaking of Monongah, those men and women that were trapped within Monongah Mine in January 2076 continued to eat each other to survive until only one man was left, Earl Williams. By the time he was alone, however, he wasn't really human anymore. He became what is known as a Wendigo Colossus, a form of cryptid that is created through cannibalism. As for those miners that remained with Garrahan after they started leasing autominers, they appear to have remained underground in their mines where they eventually mutated into mole miners. Why exactly, and also why they didn't come out of the ground for nearly 2 decades after the end of the war, is unknown. When the dwellers of Vault 76 emerged in 2102, this effectively covers what they found of the story of the mining magnates of Appalachia. In 2103, wastelanders began to arrive in the region once more. For some, this was finding new and better lands to settle, while for others it was a homecoming. One of those for whom it was a homecoming was Penelope Hornwright. When the dwellers of Vault 76 found Penelope, she was back in the safe room beneath the Hornwright estate. The dwellers had come seeking access to one of the Motherlode automated drills, as it had come to the estate tracking Penelope. It's a sign of how top secret the Motherlode project was that this was the first time Penelope had ever seen one of the Motherlode robots and known what it was. When the Motherlode requested the location of Daniel, Penelope informed the machine that her father had been dead for quite some time. The dweller managed to convince her to assist them in using the Motherlode to break into Vault 79 and gain access to the United States gold reserves contained within, something she agreed to on the stipulation that the society they intended to build would allow ghouls like her to join. Together, the Vault Dweller and Penelope repaired the Motherlode before she made her way to the Settler's Stronghold Foundation atop Spruce Knob. Once there, she assisted the Vault Dweller in recovering a suit of Chinese stealth armor, was kidnapped by raiders from Crater, assisted in another repair of the Motherlode, and then guided the drill into Vault 79. Paige, the head of the Settlers, asked her about the time between 2077 and 2103, and her general story is as follows. After the war, she wandered, likely with Bryce Garrahan, although that is not absolutely confirmed. Sometime around 2083, she gave birth to a daughter. At some point, the family came across a vault with a malfunctioning door. Penelope made a trade with the vault. She would fix the door, and in turn the vault would allow her family to live within. In the process of fixing the door, she was exposed to a massive amount of radiation, but as sometimes happens, she didn't die, she ghoulified. Since that time, she has wandered the wastelands, plying her trade as a robotics technician and geochemist. As most communities aren't friendly to ghouls, she usually wears a face covering when interacting with wastelanders. In Foundation, she's made friends with Jin, and has a pet cat named Tutti Frutti. Incidentally, Maggie Williams, the former citizen of Monongah who tried to get Hornwright to reopen the sealed Monongah mine to rescue her father, is not a fan of Penelope. She says, "I guess Hornwright's ugliness is finally showing up on the outside." I will also note here that the Motherlode autonomous drills have remained operational across Appalachia in the quarter century since the war. There are a few locations across the region where they pop up, and it appears that communist Chinese militants have made it their goal to commandeer these machines for unknown reasons. Alright, I think that's enough of the story of the mining magnates of Appalachia, but I have some notes before closing things out. As I start this section, I feel I have to again make it clear that I explicitly ignored some dates given for events in the raw materials. I did this because the dates were contradictory to other raw materials. Let me give you one of the most blatant examples. When Fallout 76 launched, we knew the basics of the fact that Daniel Hornwright's wife had passed away. It may have been that she was referred to as both Evelyn and Elaine, but we know she died prior to Daniel throwing himself into the Motherlode project, and that she died sometime in 2077. How do we know that? When writing to the governor to introduce a sales pitch of Hornwright automation related to the Appalachian Prosperity Act, Daniel refers to the APA being on the ballot for this November. As the APA was on the 2077 ballot, we know the year this message was sent was 2077. In this same email, Daniel tells the governor that his wife wants to get to know the First Lady better. Thus, Evelyn was alive in 2077. When Wastelanders launched, it included an obituary for Evelyn Hornwright dated Monday, August 25th, 2076. Not only is August 25th, 2076 not a Monday, but how could she have died in 2076 when Daniel was making dinner plans that included her in 2077? This is one of the 4 pieces of raw lore from the Charleston Herald with fairly blatant mistakes, so let's go over the other 3 now. These are Man vs. Machine, Hornwright Wins, and AMS, Corporate Bully. I'll cover these from least egregious to most. AMS Corporate Bully tells the basic story of the history of atomic mining services as a pretext to discuss the company's attempt to seize Welch. This article, with reference to the atomic mining of AMS, claims, quote, AMS abandoned the project almost immediately as they arrived, citing technical failures. Employment dried up again, the area lurched even deeper into poverty, end quote. This cannot be accurate, as there are accounts found in-game that make it clear that AMS was still operating its atomic mines up to the day of the bombs. Specifically, there were miners within the mine now known as the Glassed Cavern when the world came to an end. In fact, the shaking caused by the Chinese nukes caused an unintentional drop of a mining charge that ended up detonating within the mine. There were also those miners trapped in Kerwood Mine at the time of the bombs because AMS did a series of detonations in the area that caused so much shaking that the mine collapsed. Beyond this, AMS funded the construction of Watoga. To do this, they would have had to have monetary resources. If their work in atomic mining had failed, it would be hard to see how they would have the funding to pay Robco to build the city of the future. While their mining caused devastation to the local environment, it's hard to imagine how anything else would have worked out if it had not been profitable. Next, Man vs. Machine has issues with the timeline of innovations it provides. It claims that, in order, Hornwright developed the Rockhound, then Garrahan developed the Excavator Power Armor, after which Hornwright revealed the Autominer. Not only did the Autominer predate the Excavator Power Armor, but the article also claims that it was a cooperative effort between Hornwright and Atomic Mining Services. The Excavator was built by Garrahan as a means to keep people employed as a response to the layoffs taking place at Hornwright due to their utilization of the Autominer. Hornwright had already used its Autominers to completely drain the coal from Monongah when Garrahan was still struggling to get their power armor working. As for the claim that AMS was part of that project, the CEO of AMS outright tells his people that they had nothing to do with it. He wishes that their own work with Robco had yielded similar results, but Hornwright's experience with drilling proved to be the vital element to their success. He even makes sure to clear Penny Hornwright's name, as she was an intern at AMS in 2069, prior to the creation of the Autominer in the early 2070s. AMS had no part in the creation of the Autominer until they started making them around August 2077 under a licensing agreement signed thanks to Penny Hornwright's intervention. Next, in Hornwright Wins, we see another claim of cooperation between AMS and Hornwright, and a supposed quote from Daniel Hornwright thanking AMS. There's also a reference to Garrahan Mining Company as Garrahan Industries. Along with this, both the Man vs. Machine and Hornwright Wins articles were supposedly written on a date that is unquestionably incorrect, October 18th, 2077. First off, and this is the most minor issue, according to the articles, the event was 24 hours long. The pre- and post-articles cannot come from the same day. However, the greater issue is that the actual day of the event was April 7th, 2077, a fact that can be read on the poster advertising the event. While this might seem like one piece of evidence against 2 others, not only do those 2 pieces have other inconsistencies, the overall story of labor relations in Appalachia makes no sense with the October 18th date for the event. This can easily be established using an entry from Vivian Garrahan's terminal and one from the Garrahan security terminal. It was only after the defeat of the Excavator Power Armor and the Man vs. Machine event that Vivian Garrahan leased auto miners from Hornwright Industrial. How could the Man vs. Machine event have occurred on October 18th when 3 weeks earlier, Garrahan auto miners were already the target of protesters? Overall, all 4 of these notes cause serious issues with establishing a proper timeline as they muddy the waters surrounding some major events and organizations in pre-war Appalachia. Second of the notes, I know that first one was a doozy. Anyway, second, there is a good amount of cut content related to the Garrahan family. Specifically, there are terminal entries related to Bryce Garrahan and his brother Bill. While these entries feel appropriate to the story, they were never actually added to the game. That said, there are also entries related to the environmental group behind the air purifiers that leave the game better for having been cut. Specifically, there are terminal entries that would have been present at the air purifiers in which they indicate that Daniel is purposefully setting his mines on fire to collect minerals from the air instead of mining them. There is a sentence in one of Daniel's terminal entries that can be found in-game that might corroborate that he was going to do this. It's a pretty stupid idea when given a bit of thought. The only mines that would properly burn are coal mines, and while one might be able to harvest some trace heavy metals out of the soot, most of the pollution would simply be carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. Coal would be much more valuable unburned, and Hornwright's auto miners are perfect for extracting it. It feels like a means to make Daniel even more of a cartoon villain when he's already quite villainous to begin with, his worst act likely being leaving a bunch of townspeople buried alive because it was cheaper to pay off the families. Third, it's not clear exactly how Monongah Mine was operating when Hornwright bought the mineral rights to it. While it seems like it may have been running, there is a terminal entry from the Hornwright mine supervisor, Deke Sykes, that indicates that they had to spend months repairing damage from the 1907 mine collapse before the mine was safe for the auto miners. Incidentally, that is a reference to a real-world coal mine collapse, but anyway, how could it be safe for human miners but too unsafe for robots to work in the mines? The only thing I can guess is that there were multiple shafts and that the miners of Monongah were maybe utilizing other shafts. Fourth, Alan Garrahan is another member of the Garrahan family that didn't really come up here. He doesn't really feature into the story of the company as a mining entity, and was added to the game with the Wild Appalachia update, the first major update to Fallout 76 that is also one of the few pre-Wastelanders content patches. Alan is wrapped up in the Sheepsquatch storyline and was working as an agent for the Bish Company. He was Vivian's nephew, who blew through his inheritance and was riding the couch at the Garrahan estate. Fifth, there's a location called the Hornwright Summer Villa that is undoubtedly related to the Hornwright family, but there's no reference to the location from any of the Hornwrights we discussed. There was also a Liam Hornwright studying at Vaultec University. He was not a great student and spent most of his time partying and smoking. I don't think he was part of the immediate family, and was instead likely a cousin to Penelope. It's possible that Hornwright Summer Villa was likewise owned by another branch of the family. Hornwright also controlled the Mount Blair train yard, which was heavily involved in moving mined materials out of Appalachia, but that didn't really feature much into the overall movement of the story. Sixth, Bramwell, the home to the mega mansions of the mining magnates, is a town that exists in the real world too. It's a small town in Mercer County, West Virginia, lying in a horseshoe bend of the Bluestone River less than 2 miles from the border with Virginia. Following the Revolutionary War, the land on which Bramwell now sits was part of a land grant. By the time of the Civil War, it was known as the Wilson Carey Nichols land grant. The owners of the land lost their claim after the Civil War when they failed to pay taxes on the newly created state of West Virginia. West Virginia seized the land and had it surveyed to determine its sale value. This service was performed by Major Jedediah Hotchkiss and Captain Isaiah A. Welch, the latter of whom Welch, West Virginia is named for. These men found coal deposits along the riverbanks, which was of great interest to investors at the time. Corporations developed an interest in the area and began to push railroads towards the coal fields. In 1883, New York civil engineer Joseph H. Bramwell arrived in the area. He was appointed the first postmaster for the town. In 1884, the first rail line reached Bramwell, the same year that the first local coal mine utilizing the Pocahontas coalfield opened. Many additional mines followed in its wake. In 1888, the town was incorporated and named for its postmaster, Bramwell, who just the next year became the president of the Bramwell Bank. The Bramwell Bank was well regarded until it was done in by the Great Depression. But going back to the 19th century, Bramwell was the home of many coal barons over the decades, giving it at one point the highest number of millionaires per capita in the United States. In 1910, a fire destroyed much of the downtown, but they rebuilt. The population of the town peaked for the 1920 census at 1,690, and fluctuated up and down until the 1950s, after which it fell every census from then on. In 1984, the downtown was added to the National Register of Historic Places. The estimated 2021 population was 274. Today, the town is home to numerous tourist attractions, including coal baron mansions, the Bramwell Bank, and the Pocahontas Trail system, part of the Hatfield and McCoy trails that crisscross the countryside in the area. Lastly, there are some timeline issues with the origins of Watoga. First off, there's a real-world unincorporated community called Watoga. It's been there seemingly since the early 19th century, but we can assume that it was fully abandoned and was refounded the year on the city's seal, 2042. There's an issue here. We have a terminal entry greeting the first mayor of the city on February 4th, 2042, and encouraging him or her to speak with the AI mayor's assistant, Maya. Here's the first problem. Robco Industries, the company that is supposedly responsible for building the city, didn't exist until June 25th of the same year, 4.5 months after the founding of Watoga. The city was also funded by AMS, which is supposed to be a newcomer in the region by the 2070s, 30-something years after the founding of the city. Now, the term relatively new is fairly loose, and if we assume that the Hornwrights and Garrahans have been around for over a century or more, then yes, AMS might still be considered a relatively new company. We could even potentially assume that the article AMS Corporate Bully is right about the atomic mining not working out initially, and maybe even that it was significantly later that AMS discovered Ultracite, and that is why not long before the war they returned to atomic mining. That doesn't explain how they were financially stable enough to fund Watoga decades before that. Their model, according to the same article, is that they went into old mines and dug deeper using atomic charges. If they were just going into old mines that had been made unprofitable by poor ore quality, and were doing so decades before the invention of the auto miner, they would still have high labor costs and the mines would still likely not be profitable. It just doesn't make sense. Personally, I would date a reasonable founding of modern Watoga to the 2060s, but that's my own headcanon, not canon. I think that's enough notes, let's close things out. In the years before the Great War, Garrahan Mining, Hornwright Industrial, and Atomic Mining Services were probably the greatest drivers of the story of Appalachia. All three have fascinating stories that were cut short by the bombs. Had the world not come to an end, it's interesting to consider the effect that the spread of Ultracite might have had on the United States. If the automation of the Appalachian government had gone ahead and succeeded, what it might have meant for the country. How the Motherlode might have revolutionized mining, and potentially even tunnel construction. Instead, all we're left with is ruins, and the story of how some of the most productive companies lost their humanity, and were in the process of destroying the world around them as they did. Alright, I think that'll do it for this video. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. I'm now a G Fuel affiliate. Use my G Fuel code iCartographer at checkout to get a discount and to support the channel. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to financially support the channel directly, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons, Mesothelioma, 76 at Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Electric Head, Hero Cunning, Laced Cake, Oz Born and Bred 73, Doc Vanguard Voyager, and Lucas Rumfield for their support. I also want to specifically thank Dark Malcontent for helping with this video's script. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.